It was in the latter days of November, in a year which I shall not specify, but which is well remembered by those who follow the darker currents of European politics, that the formidable name of Huret, the Boulevard assassin, first cast its shadow over the city of London. For weeks, the newspapers had been filled with lurid accounts of his atrocities in Paris. A prefect of police stabbed in his own carriage, a minister of state felled by an explosive device disguised as a book, all executed with a theatrical brutality that spoke of a fanaticism bordering on madness. Now it was known that he had crossed the Channel, and a palpable tension gripped the capital. The fog, which had lain heavy upon us for a week, seemed a fitting shroud for a city that harboured such a viper. At our lodgings in 221B Baker Street, however, the mood was not one of civic anxiety, but of a profound and exasperating ennui. My friend, Mr. Sherlock Holmes, had exhausted the papers, paced the confines of our sitting room until I feared he would wear a groove in the carpet, and had now relapsed into one of those black and silent moods which were the despair of his friends. He lay curled upon the sofa, a long-stemmed cherrywood pipe drooping from his lips, his eyes closed, though I knew from the occasional twitch of his long, sensitive fingers that he was far from sleep. "Any news, Watson?" he asked, without opening his eyes. "Nothing of consequence," I replied, lowering the Daily Telegraph. "There is much speculation as to the whereabouts of this Huret. The police are said to be watching the ports and the anarchist clubs in Soho. Inspector MacDonald is quoted as saying his capture is imminent." A low groan was Holmes's only reply. "Imminent," he murmured, with withering scorn. "The official synonym for 'we have not the faintest conception.' They will watch the ports, and he will slip through their fingers like water. They will watch the clubs, and he will be lodging in a Mayfair hotel under the name of a visiting archduke. The official force, my dear Watson, possesses the energy of a charging bull, but the subtlety of that same animal in a china shop. This Huret is a man of intellect, a creature of the first order of cunning. To catch him requires not a dragnet, but a single, exquisitely fine thread of logic. Ah, what a chance, what a magnificent problem! And I am condemned to lie here, perishing from this rust of inaction, whilst the greatest criminal mind in France plays his game under the very noses of our fumbling Lestrade and his cohorts." He fell silent again, and the only sounds were the crackle of the fire and the distant mournful hoot of a steamer on the Thames. I knew better than to offer sympathy. For Holmes, the absence of a worthy problem was a torment more acute than any physical ailment. It was then that the sharp peal of our doorbell cut through the gloom. Holmes's eyes snapped open, and in an instant the languid dreamer was gone, replaced by the keen, alert man of action. A flicker of interest, the first I had seen in days, lit his hawk-like features. "A client, Watson, at last. I wonder what squall has blown this vessel to our little harbour. Run down and show him up, there's a good fellow." I had scarce reached the landing before Mrs. Hudson was ushering our visitor into the hall. He was a man of middle years, clad in a respectable but well-worn tweed suit. His face was pale and drawn, his eyes wide with a nervous apprehension that spoke of a mind stretched to the breaking point. He clutched a bowler hat in his hands, twisting the brim with a perpetual agitated motion. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes?" he asked, his voice little more than a whisper. "Pray step up I said, leading him towards the stairs. "He will be pleased to see you." I announced him as Mr. James Wilson, and as he stepped into the warm light of our sitting room, Holmes rose from the sofa in a single, fluid movement. "Be seated, sir," he said, gesturing to the wicker armchair. "I perceive that you have had a series of distressing experiences, and that you have travelled here from the south of London, likely Camberwell or a neighbouring district on the Metropolitan line." Our visitor gasped and sank into the chair, his eyes fixed upon my friend's face. "Good heavens, sir! How could you possibly know that? The scuffed leather on the toe of your left boot suggests a regular commuter's haste," said Holmes, lighting his pipe once more. "The faint, chalky residue on your trouser cuffs is characteristic of the soil in that particular area after a dry spell followed by damp such as we have had. As for your distress, it is writ large upon every feature. Now, sir, I beg you, compose yourself and lay your narrative before us. What is it that has brought you to this pass?" Mr. Wilson took a deep, shuddering breath and began the singular tale which was to be the first act in a drama of international importance. "My name, as you know, is James Wilson," he began, his voice trembling. "I am a man of regular and quiet habits. I work as a clerk for a shipping firm in the city, and I reside in the same small house in Camberwell where I was born. Until a fortnight ago, my life was as placid and uneventful as a mill pond. Then the strange occurrences began." He paused, licking his dry lips. Holmes leaned forward, his chin upon his hands, a glint of sheer intellectual delight in his grey eyes. "It started with a feeling," Wilson continued, "a feeling of being watched. On my walk to the station, I would have the unshakable conviction that I was being followed. I would turn suddenly, but see nothing more than the usual press of pedestrians. Then, one evening, I came home to find that my study, a room I always keep in meticulous order, had been disturbed." "A burglary?" I ventured. "No, sir, that is the strange thing. Nothing was taken, not a penny, not a trinket, but the furniture had been moved. My desk was shifted 6 inches to the left. A bookshelf was pulled a foot out from the wall. A heavy armchair was turned to face the corner. It was all so pointless, so bizarre. I called the police, but they were dismissive. They spoke of pranksters, or suggested I had perhaps been tippling." The poor man flushed with indignation. "I am a lifelong abstainer, Mr. Holmes." "Pray continue," said Holmes. "The police are rarely helpful when a situation deviates from their well-worn ruts of experience. What happened next?" "It happened twice more. On each occasion I would return home to find the furniture in my study rearranged in some new, senseless configuration. I took to locking the door, but it was useless. The lock would be picked with consummate skill, leaving not a scratch. Still, nothing was ever stolen. I began to feel I was the victim of some malicious madman, that my very sanity was being assailed. But the worst was yet to come." His voice dropped lower, and he leaned forward, his face slick with perspiration, despite the chill in the air. "Last night, Mr. Holmes, I was awoken near 2 in the morning by a faint sound from the garden. I rose from my bed and crept to the window of my bedroom, which overlooks the study at the back of the house. The moon was bright, and I saw it. There was a man standing on the lawn, staring up at my study window." "His description?" Holmes asked, his voice sharp and incisive. "He was terrifying," Wilson whispered. "Immensely tall, a giant of a man. He was gaunt and haggard, with a face as pale as death in the moonlight. He simply stood there, motionless, his gaze fixed upon that one window. For a full half-hour he remained, a dreadful sentinel. Then, as silently as he had appeared, he melted back into the shadows. I did not sleep for the rest of the night. This morning I found my study door unlocked and the furniture once more in disarray. Mr. Holmes, I can bear it no longer. I feel I'm on the verge of a breakdown. You are my last hope. He buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking. Holmes had risen and was now pacing before the fireplace, his head sunk upon his chest and his hands clasped behind him. "Most singular," he murmured. "Truly a remarkable problem. This is no madman, Mr. Wilson. The picking of a lock with such skill, the persistence, the silent observation, it all points to a definite and methodical purpose. The rearrangement of the furniture is the key. Tell me, sir, you mentioned you had lived in this house all your life. Did your father reside there before you?" "He did. He died 5 years ago. He was a locksmith by trade, and something of an amateur horologist. A very clever man with his hands, but as quiet and methodical as myself." "And he left his effects to you?" "Everything. The house, his tools, a collection of old books and clocks. They are mostly in the study, just as he left them." "Ah!" Holmes's exclamation was a sharp hiss of satisfaction. He spun around, his eyes alight with that fire of the hunt I knew so well. "Watson, the game is afoot. We are dealing with something far deeper than the persecution of a humble clerk. Mr. Wilson, your father's possessions are the target. The intruder is not moving your furniture at random, he is searching. It is a systematic, if bizarre, method of ensuring every inch of the room is surveyed. He seeks something small, something well hidden, something left behind by your father, the clever locksmith." "But what could it be?" cried our client. "My father was a man of modest means. He had no treasure." "The value of an object, sir, is determined by the one who seeks it," Holmes replied. "To you it may be a worthless trinket. To another it may be worth a man's life, or many men's lives. We will accompany you back to Camberwell at once. We must examine this study before your nocturnal visitor decides upon a more direct course of action. Watson, your hat and coat, and perhaps you would be so good as to slip your service revolver into your pocket. I have a fancy that this tall and silent gentleman may not be an altogether pleasant fellow to meet." An hour later, a four-wheeler deposited us before a neat two-story brick villa in a quiet, tree-lined street in Camberwell. It was the very picture of respectable suburban tranquillity, making the bizarre narrative we had heard seem all the more incongruous. Mr. Wilson, now somewhat fortified by Holmes's confident energy, ushered us inside. The study was a small square room at the back of the house, overlooking a tidy garden. It was crammed with the accumulated possessions of a lifetime. A large workbench, littered with the delicate tools of a watchmaker, stood against one wall. Bookshelves overflowed with volumes on mechanics, engineering and horology. Several clocks in various states of repair stood on the mantelpiece and shelves, their pendulums silent. The furniture, a heavy mahogany desk, a leather armchair and a tall filing cabinet, stood in a haphazard arrangement just as the intruder had left them. Holmes stood in the doorway for a long moment, his eyes darting into every corner, his nostrils twitching like those of a finely bred hound. "Let us not disturb a single thing," he said softly. "The floor is our canvas. Watson, do you see it?" "See what, Holmes?" The method in the madness. Observe the marks on the carpet. The desk has been moved twice, once to the left, once forward. The bookshelf only once. The armchair 3 times. Our man is not merely shifting things. He is clearing spaces, examining the floorboards and the wainscoting in sections. He is a patient and methodical searcher. He is also, I think, becoming desperate. His appearance in the garden was an act of intimidation, a psychological assault designed to drive Mr. Wilson from the house so that he might conduct a more thorough and destructive search. He produced his magnifying glass and dropped to his knees, crawling across the floor with an intensity that would have been comical were it not for the gravity of our purpose. He paused near the window, scraping a minuscule quantity of grey ash from the carpet into an envelope. He then moved to the lock on the door, examining it with the lens for a full minute. "A fine piece of work," he remarked, rising to his feet. "No scratches. He has used a skeleton key of a most sophisticated design. This is no common cracksman. Now, Mr. Wilson, tell me of your father. He was a locksmith. Did he ever undertake work of a confidential or governmental nature?" Wilson looked puzzled. "Not to my knowledge. He mostly repaired locks for local businesses and households, though, now that I think of it, there was a gentleman a few years before my father's death. A Frenchman, I believe. He came to the house several times. He was very secretive, and he had my father construct a number of intricate puzzle boxes and a special lock for a dispatch case. My father said he was the most skilled mechanician he had ever met." "A Frenchman?" Holmes's interest was visibly piqued. "Do you recall his name?" "I'm afraid not. He was a nervous bird-like man. He paid my father handsomely in gold sovereigns, and then vanished as suddenly as he had appeared." Holmes strode to the bookshelves, his long fingers trailing along the spines of the dusty tomes. "A French mechanician, a secret lock, and a search of this intensity," he mused half to himself. "The threads begin to connect. The object sought is not one of monetary value, but on needs on the surveys Isabel's form, summation. Something hidden by the Frenchman with your father's expert help." His eyes fell upon the collection of clocks on the mantelpiece. There were 7 in all, a handsome mahogany carriage clock, several plain wooden mantel clocks, and a heavy, ornate affair of black marble with bronze columns. One by one, Holmes lifted them down, tapping their casings, examining their construction, and listening to their inner workings. When he came to the black marble clock, he paused. "This one is heavier than its size would warrant," he said, placing it carefully on the desk. He opened the glass face and inspected the dial. He then turned it over, scrutinizing the maker's plate on the back. He produced a small screwdriver from his pocket and, with a few deft turns, removed the back panel. Inside was a beautiful complex array of brass cogs, springs, and levers. To my eye, it was no different from any other clock's interior. But Holmes, with a low cry of triumph, pointed with the tip of his screwdriver. "Look, Watson! Ingenious! Absolutely superb!" He indicated a small secondary winding mechanism, almost entirely concealed by the main gear train. It did not connect to the hands or the chime. It seemed to have no function whatsoever. Holmes carefully inserted a winding key from his pocket watch into the hole and gave it a quarter turn. There was a soft click, and a section of the clock's heavy marble base, no larger than a matchbox, sprang open on a concealed hinge. Mr. Wilson and I gasped in unison. Nestled within the tiny velvet-lined cavity was not a jewel or a document, but a small solid cylinder of brass, no longer than my thumb. It was intricately machined, covered in 5 revolving rings, each etched with the letters of the alphabet and the numerals 0 through 9. "A combination lock of some kind," I said. "A cipher wheel." "Precisely, Watson," Holmes exclaimed, his face flushed with the thrill of discovery. He held the cylinder up to the light. "And I would wager my reputation that this little toy is the reason for our tall friend's nocturnal visits. This, Mr. Wilson, is your father's legacy, and I fear it is a legacy of the most perilous kind." He turned to our client, his expression suddenly grave. "Mr. Wilson, for your own safety, you must not stay in this house tonight. Go to an hotel. I recommend the Charing Cross for its anonymity. Do not return until you hear from me. We, in the meantime, will borrow this fascinating little puzzle." As we took our leave, Holmes paused on the doorstep. "One more thing," he said. "The grey ash I found on the carpet. It is the residue of a French cigarette, a caporal, and the faint scent on the door jamb, a trace of garlic. Our searcher and his tall associate are undoubtedly from across the Channel. This business, Watson, has the distinct aroma of Paris about it." Back in the foggy confines of Baker Street, the chase truly began. Holmes placed the brass cylinder on the mantelpiece under the gaslight, where its cryptic letters seemed to mock us. "Our problem has resolved itself into 2 parts," he announced, beginning to pace again as he filled his foulest clay pipe. "First, to decipher this message. Second, to lay a trap for the men who seek it. The 2 are inextricably linked." "But, Holmes, where do we even begin? There must be millions of possible combinations." "True. Therefore, a random approach is futile. We must deduce the key. The key was known to 2 men, the secretive French mechanician and your father. The Frenchman is likely dead or vanished, so we must attempt to enter the mind of the late Mr. Wilson Sr. He was a locksmith, a clockmaker, a man of precision, numbers and mechanisms. The key will not be a random word. It will be something of significance to him, something logical." For the next several hours, Holmes was lost to the world. He tried dates from the clockmaker's life which our client had provided: his birth, his marriage, his death. He tried the street number of the house. He tried combinations derived from the clock's own mechanism. The brass rings turned, but the cylinder remained sealed. The sitting room filled with a haze of shag tobacco smoke as my friend wrestled with the problem, his brow furrowed in concentration. "This is devilish," he muttered after a long silence. Wilson was a craftsman, but this level of cryptographic subtlety feels different. It is as if 2 minds collaborated on the design: the practical locksmith and the secretive, more complex Frenchman. He fell to scribbling on a sheet of paper, listing words associated with clocks: time, pendulum, escapement, chime. None of them, when tried on the 5 rings, yielded any result. It was past 10 o'clock when a sharp rap came at our door. It was a summons from Inspector Lestrade of Scotland Yard. Holmes read the note with a wry smile. "Lestrade wishes for my assistance," he said. "He is at his wits' end over the Huret case. He asks me to meet him at Scotland Yard. Perhaps a little excursion will clear my head. We may even learn something that casts a light on our own puzzle. Come, Watson." We found Lestrade in his bleak office, a chaos of paperwork surrounding him. He was, as ever, a picture of energetic frustration. "Holmes, good of you to come," he said, foregoing any greeting. It's this devil Huret. He's a ghost. We've raided every anarchist den in London, we've watched the ports, we've interrogated a dozen French radicals. Nothing. It's as if the earth has swallowed him up. What was Huret's last significant act in Paris before he fled? Holmes asked, casually taking a seat. His masterpiece, Lestrade said grimly. The assassination of Monsieur Dubois, the Minister for Naval Procurement, blew him to pieces on his own doorstep. The Sûreté believe Dubois was on the verge of signing a major naval treaty with Britain. Huret's action threw the whole thing into chaos. And was anything taken from the scene? Nothing. It was pure political terror. But the French are in a panic. They say Dubois was carrying sensitive documents, plans for a new type of naval signalling system. They fear Huret may have acquired them. Holmes sat bolt upright. A signalling system, you say? Cryptographic in nature? So they believe, utterly revolutionary. It would give the French and British fleets a massive advantage. If it fell into the hands of, well, another power, it would be a catastrophe. Holmes and I exchanged a glance. The pieces were falling into place with a sudden, startling clarity. Lestrade, Holmes said, his voice quiet but intense. I believe your hunt for Huret and my own current investigation are one and the same. Have you, in your surveillance of French expatriates, come across a man of unusual height? Lestrade snorted. We've seen men of all shapes and sizes. But wait, there is one. A consumptive-looking giant they call the Spectre, a known associate of Huret, his enforcer. A man of terrifying strength. Why do you ask? Because, Inspector, I believe Le Spectre has been systematically searching a house in Camberwell for a small brass cylinder. And I believe that cylinder contains the key to Monsieur Dubois' naval signals. The inspector stared, his jaw agape. For a moment he was speechless. Then his professional jealousy warred with his grudging respect for my friend's abilities. "You found it, Holmes? You have the cipher?" "I have the container. The lock, however, has thus far resisted my efforts. But I now have a new avenue of attack. Monsieur Dubois, the victim, the original owner of the secret. The key must relate to him." We left Lestrade in a state of high excitement and hurried back to Baker Street. The fog had thinned, and a sliver of moon shone down upon the greasy pavements. "You see it, Watson?" Holmes cried, his voice electric as we rattled along in a hansom. The Frenchman who visited the locksmith was not an anarchist himself, but an agent of the French government, perhaps even Dubois's personal cryptographer. He feared for his life or for the safety of his secret. He came to London and, with the help of a skilled and trustworthy English craftsman, concealed the key to his cipher in the most ingenious way possible. Huret's gang must have learned of the secret's existence and of the locksmith's involvement. Now they are tearing his house apart to find it. Back in our rooms, he seized the cylinder once more. "Dubois," he murmured. "The key must be a 5-letter word associated with him." He tried the minister's name, Dubois. Nothing. He tried Paris. He tried naval. The lock remained stubbornly shut. Frustration etched itself upon his face. He set the cylinder down and began to pace like a caged tiger. "It's too simple, Watson. Huret would guess such obvious keys. The cryptographer was a subtle man. The key would be subtle too, something known only to him and his trusted circle." He fell silent, his gaze falling upon the daily paper I had been reading earlier, still lying open on the armchair. He froze, his eyes fixed on a small paragraph on an inner page. It was a brief remembrance of the late minister, listing his achievements and personal interests. "Watson!" he yelled, snatching up the paper. "Listen to this. Among his private passions, Minister Dubois was a noted amateur astronomer, with a particular fondness for the constellation of Cygnus, the swan, which he would observe for hours from his private observatory." Cygnus. Cygnus. 6 letters. Too long. He groaned and threw the paper down. Then his eyes lit up with a sudden, fierce intelligence. "Wait, the primary star in Cygnus, the brightest star? What is its name, Watson?" My mind, so often a repository for the stray facts Holmes discarded, came to my aid. "Deneb," I said. "It's one of the points of the summer triangle." "Deneb!" Holmes roared, pouncing on the cylinder. "Deneb. 5 letters, a word of personal significance to the owner, yet obscure enough to baffle the uninitiated." His long, nimble fingers flew over the brass rings, spinning them with feverish haste. D-E-N-E-B. There was a sharp metallic snick. The end of the cylinder popped open. Holmes let out a whoop of delight and performed a wild pirouette in the centre of the room. He carefully tipped the cylinder, and a tiny, tightly rolled piece of tissue-thin paper fell out onto the table. With the aid of a pair of tweezers, he unrolled it. Written upon it in minuscule, spidery script was not a message, but a complex table of letters and numbers, a key that would allow one to decode the naval signalling system. "We have it, Watson!" he cried, his face triumphant. "We have the bait. Now to lay the trap for our tiger, Huret, and his jackal, L'Spectre." Our plan was laid with meticulous care. Holmes sent a wire to Lestrade, instructing him to surround the house in Camberwell with his most discreet men, but to remain utterly out of sight until he received a specific signal. He then sent a second message, a carefully worded anonymous tip to a known anarchist newspaper, hinting that the Camberwell treasure was about to be moved. "Huret's spies are everywhere," Holmes explained. "They will hear this rumour within the hour. It will force their hand. They will believe they have one last chance to seize the prize before it is lost to them forever. L'Spectre will return tonight." As evening fell, we returned to the quiet suburban street. We didn't enter Mr. Wilson's house, but instead took up a position in the empty property directly opposite, which was fortunately for let. From a dusty upper window we had a perfect unobstructed view. For hours we waited in the darkness and the silence, a brace of loaded pistols on the window-sill beside us. It was close to midnight when Holmes stiffened, his hand gripping my arm. 2 figures had emerged from the shadows at the end of the street. One was the immense, stooping shape of the tall man. The other was shorter, wiry, with a quick, furtive energy. Even in the gloom, I could sense a palpable aura of menace from him. "Huret himself," Holmes breathed into my ear. "He has grown impatient. He has come to oversee the work. This is better than I could have hoped." We watched as the tall man, L'Spectre, slipped over the back garden wall with surprising agility, while Huret remained in the shadows of the street, a motionless observer. A minute later, a faint light appeared in the study window. "He is making his final search," Holmes whispered. "Now we wait for Lestrade." But our plans were destined to go awry. Suddenly, the light in the study window vanished. There was a loud crash of breaking glass, followed by a terrible, strangled cry. "Good God, Holmes," I cried. "There must be someone in there. A caretaker, perhaps." "All Lestrade's men have bungled it," Holmes snarled, his face a grim mask. "There is no time to lose, Watson. Come." We raced across the street, vaulted the fence, and burst in through the back door, which the intruder had forced. The study was in darkness, but a dreadful scuffling sound came from within. As my eyes adjusted, I could just make out a titanic struggle. The giant form of L'Inspector was locked in combat with a smaller man, who fought with the ferocity of a wild cat. It was Lestrade. The inspector must have grown impatient and entered the house, only to be surprised by the intruder. He was hopelessly outmatched. The giant had his hands around Lestrade's throat, and the inspector's struggles were growing weaker. Without a second's thought, I raised my pistol and fired at the ceiling. The roar of the shot in the confined space was deafening. For a heartbeat, the combatants froze. In that instant, Holmes, who had snatched up a heavy brass clock-winding key from the workbench, darted forward and brought it down with savage force on the giant's wrist. With a scream of pain, L'Inspector released his grip. Lestrade fell to the floor, gasping for air. The giant turned on Holmes, his pale face contorted with fury. But before he could strike, the room was flooded with the light of bull's-eye lanterns as a half-dozen constables, roused by the gunshot, poured in. The game was up. The tall man, seeing he was cornered, gave a roar of defiance and launched himself headfirst through the window, shattering the frame and vanishing into the night. "After him!" Lestrade choked out, staggering to his feet. "Don't let him escape!" But Holmes held up a hand. "Let him go, Inspector!" "Let him go!" Lestrade cried, aghast. "Are you mad?" "We have the cipher," Holmes said calmly. "He is nothing, a mere tool. It is his master we must have. Huret is still out there. He will have seen the police, and he will have fled. But he will not have fled far. He does not have what he came for, and he is a man of supreme arrogance. He will believe he can still retrieve the situation." Holmes's reasoning proved to be chillingly accurate. Huret had indeed vanished, but the hunt was now on with renewed ferocity. For 2 days all of London was scoured. Holmes, meanwhile, remained in Baker Street, deep in one of his impenetrable silences, surrounded by maps of London, railway timetables, and cryptic telegrams. On the third morning he finally emerged from his trance. "Watson," he said, his voice crisp and clear. "The final act. I have learned that the German embassy has arranged for a special, unscheduled diplomatic courier to depart from Charing Cross Station on the boat train to Dover at noon today. I have a strong suspicion that our friend Huret, having failed to acquire the original cipher, has created a forgery, and intends to sell this plausible imitation to the Germans for a small fortune before disappearing for good. He will use the diplomatic bag to ensure his own safe passage out of the country." "But Holmes, how can you be certain?" "I cannot. It is a deduction, but it is one upon which I am willing to stake everything. We have one chance to catch him. To the station, Watson, and quickly. I have already alerted Lestrade. He and his men will be waiting, but I have instructed them to do nothing until I give the signal. Huret is as cunning as a fox. He will bolt at the first sign of a uniform." Charing Cross Station was a bedlam of steam, smoke, and shouting porters. We took up our position near the ticket barrier for the Continental Express, Holmes disguised as a shambling elderly Italian priest, and I as his travelling companion. We watched as the passengers began to board. Minutes before the train was due to depart, a carriage drew up, and a tall, impeccably dressed man with a monocle and a diplomatic portfolio stepped out. This was the German courier. He was met by a station official and escorted towards the train. "Now, watch closely, Watson," Holmes murmured from beneath his wide-brimmed hat. As the German diplomat passed a pile of luggage, a stooped and elderly porter who had been loitering nearby stumbled, sending a cascade of bags tumbling across the platform. In the ensuing confusion, the porter collided with the diplomat. For a fleeting second, their hands touched. It was over in an instant. The porter righted himself, apologized profusely in a wheezing voice, and shuffled away. "That's him," Holmes hissed. That was the exchange, the forged cipher for a bag of money. Huret in the guise of a porter, brilliant, simple, audacious. The real diplomat, oblivious, continued to his carriage. The false porter, meanwhile, was now walking briskly towards the station exit. Holmes straightened up, casting off his stoop and his Italian accent. He raised a whistle to his lips and blew a single piercing blast. Instantly, the station erupted. Uniformed policemen seemed to materialize from the very walls. The porter, Huret, saw the trap closing. He spun around, his face a mask of snarling hatred. A knife appeared in his hand, as if by magic. With the speed of a striking snake, he seized a woman who was passing by, pulling her in front of him as a shield. "Stay back!" he screamed in French, "or the woman dies!" The police hesitated, but Holmes did not. He was already moving, not towards Huret, but to the side, where a luggage trolley stood laden with heavy trunks. With a great heave, he sent the trolley careering across the platform. It struck the assassin from the side, sending him sprawling and knocking the woman clear. Before Huret could recover his footing, a dozen officers were upon him, and the notorious Boulevard assassin was finally disarmed and bound. That evening, as a welcome fire blazed in our grate, Holmes delivered his final analysis of the case over a celebratory glass of port. "The key to the whole affair, my dear Watson, was the initial assumption," he said, stretching his long legs out towards the flames. "The police assumed Huret was in London for the purposes of anarchy and terror. I, on the other hand, suspected a financial motive. Men like Huret are fanatics, but their fanaticism often has a price. The naval signals were a commodity of immense value. From the moment Mr. Wilson described the methodical search, I knew we were not dealing with a madman, but a professional. His father, the locksmith, was the link. A quiet craftsman in London is the perfect anonymous safe deposit box for a desperate French agent. Huret's intelligence network is clearly first-rate. They knew of the secret's existence, but not its precise nature or location. Hence the strange, systematic ransacking. Our greatest stroke of fortune," he continued, steeping his fingers, "was the newspaper article. Without the mention of Minister Dubois' passion for astronomy, I confess the cipher might have defeated me. It is a lesson, Watson, that no detail, however trivial, is ever truly unimportant. The fate of nations can hang upon a single word, like Deneb." "And L'Spectre, the tall man?" I asked. "He was captured 2 nights ago, trying to stow away on a cargo ship bound for Rotterdam. Without his master, he was lost. A formidable brute, but with the mind of a child. As for Huret, He will be extradited to France, where I have no doubt he will face the guillotine. It is a grim end, but one he has thoroughly earned. He picked up his violin from the corner and drew the bow across the strings, producing a low, plaintive melody. "It is a strange world, is it not?" he mused, his eyes half closed. A quiet clockmaker in Camberwell becomes the unwitting guardian of a secret that could alter the balance of power in Europe. A humble shipping clerk is terrorized by an international assassin. It confirms my belief that the most extraordinary dramas are played out not on the great stage of politics, but in the quiet, unassuming corners of everyday life. And that, my friend, is why our little practice here in Baker Street will never want for employment.